Deep in the Katanga night, a Belgian police officer takes a hacksaw to a prime minister. His name is Gerard Soete. His shirt clings to his back, soaked through with sweat and something darker. His hands shake, not from fear, but from 2 days without sleep. And in his fist, wiped clean on the hem of his uniform, he holds a single tooth. A molar capped in gold, still wet from the mouth it was torn from. He will keep it for 40 years. He will carry it in his pocket through a quiet retirement in Belgium. He will set it on his kitchen table. And one day, an old man in a comfortable chair, he will hold it up to a television camera and smile. The mouth that tooth came from belonged to the most dangerous man in the world. 3 months earlier, that same man had stood before a king and refused to bow. 6 months before that, he was selling beer. This is how you erase a human being, and this is the man they could not stop talking about, even after they had dissolved him into nothing. His name was Patrice Lumumba. And to understand why 4 governments wanted him gone, you have to go back to the beginning, to a boy in a mission school who was told exactly how small his life was allowed to be. He was born on the 2nd of July, 1925, in a village called Onalua, in the red dirt heart of the Kasai. His mother named him Izeye Tasambu Tawosa. He belonged to the Tetela, a people small in number, scattered with no great chiefs and no seat at any table. A boy from the Tetela was born already at the back of the line. And that accident of birth would one day become his greatest weapon, because a man who belongs to no powerful tribe can speak for all of them. He was restless in a way that frightened his teachers. He read everything the mission would give him, and then read what they would not. He wrote poems. He wrote letters to newspapers he had no business writing to. He filled notebooks with a handwriting that leaned forward, as if the words themselves were in a hurry. By his late 20s, he wore a postal clerk's uniform in Stanleyville, sorting other men's letters behind a wooden counter. Picture the hands. Fast, precise, stamping and sorting, a mind moving 3 times quicker than the job allowed. He had a wife now, Pauline, married to him at 14 in an arranged match, already carrying the weight of a household while he chased something she could not yet name. Then the counter closed behind him. He was arrested for embezzlement, for money missing from the post office accounts, and the door of a Belgian colonial cell shut on the ambitious clerk. But watch what a cell does to a certain kind of man. Behind those bars, sorting his own thoughts instead of other men's mail, Patrice Lumumba stopped being angry at his own misfortune and started being angry at the machine. He looked at the walls and saw 80 years of a country built to keep men exactly like him behind exactly this kind of door. He went into that prison, a clerk who had made a mistake. He came out a man with a mission and a name he chose for himself, Patrice. From the outside, it looked like the end of him. It was the beginning. He landed in Leopoldville in 1957, and here is where the story turns on something nobody saw coming. A brewery. He took a job as a sales director for Congo, the makers of polar beer, and the colonial authorities thought nothing of it. Let the clever natives sell bottles. It kept him busy. It kept him harmless. They had no idea they had just handed him a country, because in colonial Leopoldville, an African could not hold a political meeting, could not gather a crowd, could not organize. But a beer salesman. A beer salesman could walk into every bar in every African quarter of the city, and every bar was already full of men. Men off shift, men with money in their pockets, men who had swallowed the same humiliations he had. Picture him in the doorway of a slum bar at dusk, the tinny bounce of Congolese rumba crackling off a radio in the corner, green bottles sweating in the heat, passed hand to hand, and Patrice Lumumba, tall and impossibly thin, sliding onto a bench, buying around and listening, always listening first, then talking. And the talk was never really about beer. They started shouting his name for the drink itself. Pesa ungai Lumumba. Give me a Lumumba. A man had become a toast in the mouths of the poorest people in the city, and the Belgians, counting their sales figures, smiled at how well the beer was moving. Every bottle he sold was a name learned, a grievance heard, a follower made. He was building the only thing the Congo did not have, and the colony feared most, a movement that belonged to no single tribe, that stretched across the whole nation, forged not in a palace, but in the sour, crowded dark of 100 slum bars. In 1958, he crossed the continent to Accra and stood in a room with Kwame Nkrumah, the man who had already broken the chains in Ghana. He walked in a Congolese organizer. He walked out a Pan-Africanist, certain that the whole continent was one wound and one cure. Brussels finally noticed. In October of 1959, they arrested him again, this time for inciting riots in Stanleyville, and they told themselves the same comforting lie they had told before. A cell will quiet him. They had learned nothing. Behind bars, Patrice Lumumba was no longer a clerk who had stumbled. He was a leader. The whole country was watching, and every day they kept him locked away. His people loved him more. The Belgians had reached for a jailer's key and forged a crown instead. When the elections came in 1960, they would need this dangerous man in the room, and they would have to open the door themselves. They believed the Congo was theirs to hand over gently, on their terms, in their time. They were about to learn that the man in the cell had already decided the terms would be his. And on the 30th of June, in front of a king in a white uniform, he would walk to a microphone that was never meant for him. June 30, 1960. The Palais de la Nation in Leopoldville. The air inside is thick enough to chew, heat radiating off white stone walls, and the room is packed with the two halves of a country that do not belong in the same building. On one side, Belgian dignitaries in dress uniform, gold braid catching the light. On the other, Congolese in vivid printed pagnas, men who 3 days ago could not enter this building through the front door. Flash bulbs pop like small lightnings, and on the dais, resplendent in white, sits a 29-year-old king. King Baudouin of Belgium rises to speak, and what he says will set the whole day on fire. He praises the Congo's colonizers. He praises the genius of his great-great-uncle, King Leopold II, the man whose private ownership of this land killed millions, whose overseers cut the hands from workers who failed to meet a rubber quota. Baudouin stands in a room full of the descendants of those workers and calls it genius. The Congolese elites are expected to nod, to applaud, to accept a freedom handed to them on a velvet cushion with conditions stitched into the lining. President Kasa-Vubu, the compromise chosen to keep everyone calm, delivers his careful reply. No mention of the wounds, no mention of the dead. The ceremony is going exactly as Brussels scripted it. And then a tall, impossibly thin man with a goatee and thick black glasses rises from his seat. He is not on the program to speak. He walks to the microphone anyway. He does not thank the king. He looks out at his own people, and he begins with the word that changes everything. We, not you, not the natives, we who have suffered. Watch the room split in real time. His voice, rapid and rising, pours out 80 years held behind clenched teeth. He speaks of the morning-to-night labor for wages that could not buy enough food to drive away hunger. He speaks of the land seized under laws that recognized only that might makes right. He speaks of the beatings, the insults, the black man forced to say "Monsieur" to a boy half his age while never once being called Monsieur himself. Every sentence is a wound. The polite ceremony was built to hide, and he is naming each one out loud into a live microphone in front of the king who owns the wound. The Belgian faces freeze. Baudouin's jaw sets hard. An aide leans toward another aide. This was not supposed to happen, and there is no line in the program to stop it. But the Congolese side of the room has stopped breathing, and then it erupts. The cheers come up like a wave off the ocean floor from men who have waited their whole lives to hear one of their own say the unsayable to the face of power and not be dragged away for it. Picture one man in that crowd. A clerk maybe, or a dock worker, someone who has swallowed Monsieur 10,000 times. He is on his feet, hands raw from clapping, tears cutting down through the dust on his face. For the first time in his life, someone in a room like this is speaking for him instead of over him. That is what Patrice Lumumba gave them in 8 minutes. Not a policy, a spine. But the same 8 minutes did something else, something he could not see from the podium. In the frozen Belgian faces, in the tightening jaw of the king, a decision was quietly being made. This man was not going to be manageable. This man was not going to be grateful. This man was going to be a problem. From the outside, it looked like a triumph. The Congo was free. Its greatest orator had spoken truth to a king and lived. The photographs went around the world. But the handshake of independence was a trap, and Patrice Lumumba had just walked into it with his eyes wide open. The Belgians had planned a freedom in name only, a flag and an anthem, while the same white officers ran the army, the same white managers ran the mines, the same money flowed to the same men in Brussels. Independence was supposed to be a costume. Patrice Lumumba had just announced in front of the whole world that he intended to wear the real thing. He shook the king's hand, he smiled for the cameras, and somewhere in a Belgian ministry and an American embassy, men who had listened to that speech began, very quietly, to reach for their pens. He had made himself unforgivable on day one. Now he had to actually govern the impossible thing he had inherited, a country the size of Western Europe, with barely a handful of university graduates among 15 million people, an army still commanded top to bottom by Belgian officers, and a treasury the colonizers had every intention of keeping their hands on. He had 5 days, because down in the barracks, in a camp called Thisville, the men who carried the guns had listened to the independence speeches too. They had heard the word free, and they had looked around at their own army and seen that not one thing had changed. The officers barking orders were still white. The pay was still a joke. The promotions still stopped at the color of a man's skin. They were waiting to hear that freedom meant them too. Instead, a Belgian general was about to climb in front of them, pick up a piece of chalk, and write 4 words on a blackboard that would tell 15,000 armed men exactly where they still stood. The country Patrice Lumumba had just freed with his voice was about to come apart in his hands, and it would start with the men holding the rifles. July 5, 1960. Camp Hardy at Thisville, 5 days into freedom. A Belgian general named Emile Janssen stands in front of a room full of Congolese soldiers. He commands the Force Publique, the colonial army, 15,000 African men with rifles and one unshakable belief, that independence meant them too, that the man barking at them would finally have to call them equals. Janssen picks up a piece of chalk. He turns to the blackboard. And in front of the men who won the country's freedom 5 days ago, he writes 4 words. Before independence equals after independence. He means it as an order. Nothing has changed. Nothing will change. The white officer still commands. The black soldier still obeys. The flag is new, and the anthem is new, and everything that actually matters is exactly, deliberately the same. Look at the face of one soldier in that room. A corporal maybe, who marched in the Independence Parade with his chest out, who wrote home to his village that the humiliation was finally over. He reads the chalk. He understands, in one cold instant, that his own general has just told him his freedom was a decoration, that the word monsieur is still not for him. Something breaks in that room that no chalk can rewrite. Within hours, the camp is in open revolt. Soldiers pour into the armory and seize the rifles that were always meant to be turned outward, never at the officers who held the keys. White commanders who ruled by the whip and the word for decades suddenly find themselves running, packing families into cars in the dark, fleeing a country they were certain they still owned. And here is the trap inside the trap. The mutiny was a fire the Belgians had all but lit, and now they use the smoke as their excuse. White families panic. Newspapers in Brussels scream about savagery and chaos. And Belgium, the country that had just signed the Congo away, announces it must send its troops back in to protect its citizens, to restore order, to reoccupy the nation it had freed 6 days earlier. Patrice Lumumba, prime minister for less than a week, watches his army dissolve and his former masters march back through the front door under the banner of rescue. From the map view, it is a state coming apart at the seams. From the ground, it is one man in an office in Leopoldville realizing that the people he shook hands with are already tearing up the agreement. Then comes the blow that was the whole point of everything. July 11. In the deep south, in the province of Katanga, a man named Moïse Tshombe stands up and declares that his province is no longer part of the Congo. Katanga secedes. And Katanga is not just any province. Katanga is the vault. Understand what sits under that red Katangan soil. Copper in seams that run for miles. Cobalt. And uranium from a mine called Shinkolobwe, the very uranium that fueled the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This one province holds the beating financial heart of the entire country, and it does not secede alone. Behind Tshombe stand Belgian soldiers, Belgian money, and one enormous Belgian company, the Union Minière du Haut Katanga. The mining giant that had pulled fortunes out of that ground for half a century and had no intention of handing its mines to a nationalist in Leopoldville who talked about the wealth belonging to the people who live on it. Remember that name, the Union Minière. It will come back at the very end of this story in a form so grotesque you will not believe a company could stoop to it. So picture Patrice Lumumba now. He is prime minister of a country that, in 11 days, has lost its army to mutiny, lost its independence to a reinvasion, and lost its richest province to a company with a flag. The treasury that was supposed to build his free nation is now funding the men trying to break it apart. From the map, a nation is fracturing along every seam at once. From the ground, it is a 35-year-old man staring at a wall map of his own country and watching the colors bleed out of it. He is not naive. He knows exactly who is behind Tshombe. He knows the mutiny was manufactured. He knows the reinvasion is a lie dressed as a rescue. And he knows he cannot fight the Belgian army, the secessionists, and the Union Minière all at once with an army that just shot its own officers. So he does the one thing a leader with no allies is supposed to be able to do. He turns to the world. He picks up the machinery of international law, the great post-war promise that small nations would never again be devoured by large ones. And he calls the one institution built to protect a country exactly like his. He calls the United Nations. Die Kammerskjold, the Secretary General, answers. Peacekeepers are coming. Blue helmets, thousands of them, flowing into the Congo to restore the sovereignty that Belgium is shredding. For one moment, Patrice Lumumba lets himself breathe. The world has heard him. The rules are real. Someone is finally coming to stand between his country and the men tearing it apart. He believes he has just called in the cavalry. He has no idea he has just invited the machine that will hold him down while others do the killing. Because the blue helmets will arrive, and they will not march on Katanga. They will not force the secessionists out. They will treat the legitimate elected government of the Congo as if it were merely one more faction in a squabble, and the man who begged them to defend his nation's borders will slowly realize that the referee is quietly wearing the other team's colors. The UN was supposed to be neutral. Patrice Lumumba was about to discover what neutral really means when the powerful have already decided who they want dead. And in Washington, men were watching this desperate prime minister reach for help, and they were about to decide that the direction he reached next made him something worse than inconvenient. It made him a target. August 1960. The blue helmets have arrived, and they have done nothing. They guard airports. They patrol streets. They will not march on Katanga. Patrice Lumumba stands in his office with a nation still bleeding minerals out its southern flank, and the referee he called for has folded its arms. So he does the only thing left to a man abandoned by the West. He asks the East. He requests Soviet aid. Not soldiers, not ideology. Trucks and transport planes. The plane machinery to move his own army south and end the secession himself, since no one else will. It is a logistics request from a desperate man. It is about wheels and wings. But watch what those wheels become the moment they cross a certain line on a map in Washington. Because in 1960, the world is split in two, and the men who run the American half see everything through a single lens. There is no such thing as a Congolese nationalist. There is only with us or against us. And a black African leader accepting Soviet trucks is, to them, not a man solving a problem. He is a domino beginning to fall. Overnight, in the cables and the briefing rooms, Patrice Lumumba stops being a prime minister and becomes a contagion. They start calling him the Fidel Castro of Africa. They convince themselves that if the Congo tips, the whole continent tips, and the uranium and the cobalt and the copper all slide behind the Iron Curtain. Here is the truth. They buried under that word, communist. Patrice Lumumba was no communist. He read Pan-Africanists, not Marx. He wanted the Congo's wealth for the Congo, not for Moscow. He turned east for exactly one reason, because the West turned its back first. The Americans and the UN refused him, and then acted shocked and betrayed when a drowning man grabbed the only rope thrown to him. They forced him into the arms. They then condemned him for reaching. But the Mirage was more useful than the man. Call him a communist, and killing him stops being a crime. It becomes a duty. On August 26, the director of the CIA, Alan Dulles, sends a cable to the station in Leopoldville. The words are cold, bureaucratic, and unmistakable. Lumumba's removal, he writes, must be an urgent and prime objective, a high priority of our covert action. And behind that cable stands the authority no one wanted written down. The order to assassinate Patrice Lumumba came from the top of the United States government, from the desk of President Dwight Eisenhower himself. Now meet the man who had to catch that order. Larry Devlin, CIA Chief of Station, Congo. 38 years old, square-jawed, a Word W8W8 veteran who joined the agency in 1949 and stepped off a plane in Leopoldville just 10 days after independence, straight into the fire. Picture him in a sweltering office, white short-sleeve shirt soaked through, dark tie loosened, a cigarette always burning down toward his fingers. A company man, a believer, a man who genuinely thought he was holding back a Soviet tide. And into Devlin's sweltering world walks a man carrying a small kit and a false name. He calls himself Joe from Paris. His real name is Sidney Gottlieb, a chemist for the CIA, the mind behind the agency's darkest experiments. He opens his kit in the safe house. Inside, among ordinary-looking toiletries, is a tube of toothpaste. It is not toothpaste. It has been loaded with a biological poison engineered to kill in a way that would mimic a disease native to the region, so that when the Prime Minister of the Congo dropped dead, the world would shrug and call it African fever. The plan is to slip it into Lumumba's own bathroom, to murder him with the most intimate, ordinary object in a man's morning. A tube he would squeeze onto his own brush, in his own home, with his own hand. Devlin looks at the tube. He asks the obvious question, who authorized this? And Joe from Paris gives him the answer that makes Devlin's blood run cold. He says, simply, the president. Sit with the ordinariness of it. Not a bomb, not a sniper. A tube of toothpaste in a leather kit, carried in a diplomatic pouch across an ocean, meant to end a man over a bathroom sink while his wife slept in the next room and his infant son breathed in his crib. Devlin, to his own surprise, stalls. He does not plant the tube. Whether from conscience or cold calculation, he lets the toothpaste plot die in a drawer. But make no mistake, this is where the myth of the reluctant good soldier must fall. Devlin did not save Patrice Lumumba. He simply chose a slower method. He would go on to fund the coup, track the escape, and help engineer the final transfer that fed Patrice Lumumba to his killers. He rejected the toothpaste and chose the firing squad. And he was not the only professional circling. In the same city moved a woman almost no one suspected. Daphne Park, listed as consul and first secretary, in truth, the head of British intelligence in Leopoldville. 39 years old, stout, unassuming, with the exterior of a cheerful English spinster from a village mystery novel. She poured tea, she smiled, and behind that disarming calm sat one of the sharpest, coldest operational minds in MI6, watching the same uranium mine at Shinkalabwe and calculating, in her own quiet way, that Patrice Lumumba was a threat to British strategic assets that would have to be removed. Half a century later, an old woman in an armchair, she would set down her teacup when a British politician mentioned the theory that MI6 had a hand in Lumumba's death, and she would answer him in 4 words. We did. I organized it. So count them now. The heads of state and the shadow workers all leaning toward the same small man. An American president, a Belgian government, British intelligence, the CIA station chief and his poison, and a mining company with its own private army. One thin, restless man in a tailored suit, and against him the combined intelligence services of the Western world. The toothpaste had failed, but the men who wanted him gone were not amateurs, and they were not finished. They simply stopped trying to kill him from the outside. They decided to take his government away from him first, and they already had the perfect instrument, a 29-year-old colonel who owed his career, and soon his fortune, to the men in the embassy. September 1960. The men who could not poison Patrice Lumumba decided to erase him a different way, not with a tube in a bathroom, with paper. Meet the man holding the pen, Count Etienne Davignon. 28 years old, Belgian nobility born in Budapest, fast-tracked for the heights of European power. Picture him at a polished mahogany desk inside the Belgian embassy, immaculate in a bespoke suit, a crisp white pocket square, not a hair out of place in 90-degree heat. While Leopoldville sweats and bleeds outside his window, Davignon stays clean outside his window. Davignon stays clean. And in his careful diplomat's hand, he writes a sentence that reads like a memo and functions like a death warrant. The removal of Patrice Lumumba, he notes, is a primordial problem, the aim being to unite the Congolese leaders against him. Understand exactly what a man like Davignon does in a coup. He does not carry a gun. He does not throw a punch. He drafts the legal arguments. He builds the paperwork that lets other men call a crime a procedure. Somewhere across the city, a Congolese president will need words to justify the impossible, and a young count in a spotless suit is quietly writing those words for him. Because, on September 5, President Kasavubu goes on the radio. In a single broadcast using arguments he did not write, he announces that he is dismissing his own prime minister. Patrice Lumumba, the man who won the election, who has the parliament, who has the people, is fired by decree over the airwaves. Lumumba does not blink. He seizes a microphone of his own and fires Kasavubu right back. 2 men, each declaring the other removed, each certain he is the legitimate government of the Congo. Parliament backs Lumumba. The law, by any honest reading, backs Patrice Lumumba, but the law does not run the streets, and the paralysis is the point. While the two heads of the state cancel each other out, the country freezes, and into that frozen space steps the man the embassy has been grooming all along. His name is Joseph Mobutu, a 29-year-old colonel, a former journalist, a former sergeant, a man of enormous ambition and no fixed loyalty except to whoever holds the purse. And the purse, quietly, belongs to Larry Devlin and the CIA. On September 14, Mobutu goes on the radio and announces he is neutralizing both politicians and the president, suspending the government, taking control. He dresses it up as a temporary measure to let the hotheads cool down, a soldier stepping in to save the nation from its squabbling leaders. From the outside, it looked like a Congolese officer restoring order. It was a foreign operation wearing a Congolese uniform. The money that paid the loyal soldiers, the men who backed Mobutu when the barracks could have gone either way, traced back through the embassy to Washington. The American Special Group had approved covert funds to bankroll exactly this. The CIA did not need to fire a shot. It simply bought the man holding the guns. And here is the cruelty of the design. They did not arrest Patrice Lumumba, not yet. An arrested prime minister is a martyr, a prisoner the world asks questions about. Instead, they left him in his own residence and closed the walls around him slowly, so the world would see a man merely sidelined, merely out of office, nothing worth a headline. But look closely at that house, because this is where the dread becomes physical. Around the residence sits a first ring, United Nations peacekeepers, blue helmets, there ostensibly to protect him. And around them sits a second ring, Mobutu's soldiers, the ANC, who want him dead. Two rings of armed men, one facing in to guard him, one facing in to seize him, and Lumumba trapped in the small pocket of air between them. Picture the geometry of it from his window. If the blue helmets leave, the soldiers take him in minutes. If he steps outside the gate, he steps into the hands of men who have been told he is the enemy of the nation. The UN guards him against the soldiers, and the soldiers guard him against escape. He is protected and imprisoned by the same wall. Now go inside the house. This is the ground view that matters. Pauline is there. Their infant son, Roland, is there. Patrice Lumumba paces rooms he cannot leave. A man built to move through crowds and slum bars and packed halls. A man whose entire power lived in his voice and his motion. And now the crowds are gone and the motion is a cage. He can still speak. He speaks on the phone, he writes, he plans. But every word now echoes off walls, and every night the ring of soldiers outside grows a little more confident. Think about what that does to a man like him. Not fear of death. He has already made his peace with that. The specific torture of stillness, of hearing your country come apart on the radio while you sit forbidden to touch it, of watching your wife try to keep an infant calm in a house surrounded by men who want you gone, of knowing that the great machine you called in for help, the United Nations, is the very thing keeping you sealed inside these walls. The claustrophobia is not a metaphor. It is a man measuring the distance from his door to the gate and counting the rifles in between. And far away, in Stanleyville, there is one bright, dangerous hope. Patrice Lumumba's supporters still hold the East. His deputy, Antoine Gizenga, is building a loyalist stronghold, a place where the real government could regroup, where the elected prime minister could become a leader again instead of a prisoner. 600 miles of jungle and river and hostile checkpoints away. 600 miles, in a country with no highways worth the name, through territory crawling with the men who want him. In the coming rains, he begins to plan it anyway. Understand what kind of desperation this is. A head of government, elected months ago, is now plotting to sneak out of his own home in the dark like a hunted fugitive, to run the length of a nation to reach the only ground where his own name still means safety. The plan is close to suicidal. His allies inside the house know it. To leave the ring of blue helmets is to strip off the only thing keeping the soldiers at bay. But to stay is to rot in a slow cage until they find a quieter way to finish him. Both roads lead into the dark. One at least moves. So he waits for weather. He waits for a night when the rain comes down so hard the guards pull back under cover, when the soldiers' vigilance softens, when a convoy of cars might slip out unseen into the storm. He is going to gamble everything, his life, his family, his last chance at power, on a wall of rain and 600 miles of mud. And on the night of November 27, the sky finally opens. The rain comes down in blinding diagonal sheets, drumming the roof, drowning the floodlights, blurring the shapes of the men at the gate. Lumumba climbs into a Chevrolet in the dark. The engine turns over under the roar of the storm, and the most hunted man in Africa slips out of his cage and into the rain, running for a river 600 miles away. He does not know that the same river is where he will make the one choice that ends everything. The rain has not stopped for 3 days. It hammers the roof of the Chevrolet, turns the roads to rivers of deep red mud, swallows the headlights whole. And inside the convoy, a prime minister is running for his life at the speed of a country that was built to keep him from ever moving. 600 miles to Stanleyville, to the Loyalists, to a place where his name is still law and his life is still his own. But watch what slows him down. It is not the mud. It is not the checkpoints. It is his own heart. Because Lumumba cannot simply run. Everywhere the convoy passes, villagers spill into the road in the downpour, and they recognize him. Their prime minister. The man whose name they shout for a glass of beer. The man who stood up to a king. And he cannot help himself. He stops the car. He climbs out into the rain. He speaks to them. Each speech is a gift to the people who love him, and a flare shot into the sky for the men hunting him. Every crowd that cheers his name marks his position on a map that Mobutu's soldiers are reading in real time. His greatest gift, his voice, the thing that built him, is now the thing dragging his pursuers closer with every mile. His aides beg him to stop stopping. Keep driving. Say nothing. Be no one until Stanleyville. But asking Patrice Lumumba to pass his own people in silence is asking him to stop being the man they are trying to save. By the 1st of December, the hunters have closed the distance. The convoy reaches a place called Lodi on the banks of the Sankuru River. Cross that river, and the far bank means loyalist ground, a clear run to freedom. His people are waiting on the other side. Picture the river in the rain. Wide, dart churning, the surface pocked white by the downpour, the current pulling hard. There is no bridge, only a hollowed canoe and a ferryman. Patrice Lumumba climbs into the canoe. Pauline and little Roland are still on the near bank, meant to follow. The ferryman pushes off, and the Prime Minister of the Congo paddles across the water toward the one shore where he will be safe. And he makes it. He steps onto the far bank. Loyalist territory. Freedom, actually under his feet. Everything he ran 600 miles for is right here. Solid ground, a clear path east, his life back in his own hands. And then, across the water, through the roar of the rain, he hears it. Screams. Mobutu's soldiers have reached the far bank behind him. They have caught Pauline. They have caught Roland, his infant son. And their voices carry across the churning river to the man who just reached safety, the woman he married when she was 14, the child who cannot yet walk, in the hands of the men who want their father dead. Now hold on this moment, because everything in this story bends around the next 60 seconds. Lumumba is safe. He is on the free bank. Every aide around him knows exactly what waits if he goes back, and they tell him. They plead with him. If you cross that river again, they will kill you. Stanleyville is right there. The counter-government is right there. Your name, your movement, the whole future of the Congo needs you alive on this side of the water. Do not go back. You cannot save them by dying with them. They are right. Politically, strategically, in every cold calculation, they are completely right. And it does not matter at all. Because on the far bank, a woman is screaming, and she is his wife, and their baby is in her arms. And Patrice Lumumba, who defied a king, who stared down the CIA, who ran 600 miles through the mud, looks across that river at the only thing he will not gamble. He tells the ferryman to turn the canoe around. Understand what this is. This is not a man captured. This is not a hunt that succeeded. The dragnet failed. The soldiers did not catch him. He escaped. He was free. He crossed to the far shore with his own 2 hands and stood on solid, safe ground. He went back on purpose. He paddled away from his own freedom and toward the men he knew would kill him, because the alternative was to buy his life with his family's, and that was a price he would not pay. The strong man who wanted the whole Congo united in one nation would not leave one woman and one child on the wrong side of a river. Center her in this, because she is the heart of the whole film. Pauline. 23 years old, married at 14 to a man the world would spend decades fighting over. She did not choose the microphone or the presidency or the Cold War that swallowed her family. She chose him, or had him chosen for her, and then watched the entire Western Hemisphere decide her husband had to die. And now, on a muddy riverbank in the rain, her screams are the sound that pulls him back to his death. She will carry that. For the rest of her long life, she will carry the knowledge that his love for her was the thing that finally caught him. The canoe touches the near bank. The soldiers are waiting. They seize him. They bind his wrists, the rope pulled brutally tight, cutting into the skin, cutting off the blood. They strike him. They throw the Prime Minister of the Congo into the back of a truck-like cargo. And here, watch the men in the blue helmets. United Nations peacekeepers, Ghanaian troops are present. African soldiers, men who might have looked at Patrice Lumumba and seen the future of their own continent, stand within sight of the arrest. They have the guns. They have the mandate to protect. And they have their orders. Stand down. So they watch. They watch a democratically elected head of government beaten and bound and thrown into a truck by the men who overthrew him. And they do not fire a single shot. The great machine Lumumba called in to save his country stands at parade rest while his country's elected leader is dragged away in ropes. The illusion of the neutral referee dies on that riverbank, in front of soldiers who could have changed history and were ordered not to. The truck pulls away through the mud, carrying a bound man toward an airport, toward a camera crew, toward the whole world. And what they were about to do to him in front of those cameras would strip the last shred of dignity from a head of state, and the international community that filmed it would not lift a single finger. December 2nd, 1960, Ndjili Airport, Leopoldville. The truck doors open and the world's cameras are already waiting. The International Press Corps is here in force. Lenses, flashbulbs, newsreel cameras winding and clicking, the machinery that shows the world what it wants to be shown. And what it is about to show the world is the Prime Minister of the Congo, turned into a spectacle. They drag him from the back of the truck. His trademark glasses are gone, knocked from his face somewhere along the road. His hair is wildly matted. A dark clot of dried blood swells on his cheek. His hands are still bound behind his back, the rope pulled so tight it has cut off the blood to his fingers. A soldier grabs him by the hair and forces his head up so the cameras can see his face, so the world can see that the man who defied a king is now a prisoner who cannot even lift his own chin. And then they do the thing that no one who saw the footage ever forgot. A soldier takes a crumpled, dirt-stained piece of paper. On it is the text of one of Lumumba's own speeches, the words in which he declared himself the legitimate leader of the Congo. His words, his voice, on paper. and the soldier forces it into the Prime Minister's mouth and makes him chew it and makes him swallow it. They make him eat his own words. Sit inside the cruelty of the symbol because they chose it deliberately. Patrice Lumumba was his voice. The voice built him from a beer salesman into a prime minister. The voice stole the microphone from a king. The voice was the one weapon they could never take from him at a podium. So at the end, they did not just bind his hands. They forced the words themselves back down his throat, the dry paper against his bleeding gums, and made the man of the spoken word literally swallow it in silence. It is a message written in a language older than politics. We have taken the one thing you had, we have made you eat it, and there is no one coming to stop us. Now widen out, because the most damning part of this scene is not the soldier or the paper. It is everyone else standing in the frame. The cameras keep rolling. The journalists keep shooting. This is not happening in a basement, in the dark, off the record. It is happening on an airport tarmac in broad daylight, in front of the international press, and the footage travels around the planet. The whole world sees a head of state degraded like this, and the whole world does nothing. The United States sees it. Belgium sees it. The United Nations, whose peacekeepers are stationed in this very country, sees it. Governments that speak endlessly of dignity and law and human rights watch a democratically elected leader treated like this on film, and they issue no ultimatum. They send no rescue. They lift no finger. They had already decided he was expendable. It simply confirmed that his captors could do anything in full view and pay no price. Here is the belief that dies in this chapter. Somewhere, a viewer still assumes that there are limits, that the international community, whatever its failures, would surely draw a line at the public torture of a head of state caught on camera. The truth is colder. They watched, they filmed, they broadcasted, and they moved on. They take him to Camp Hardy, the prison at Thisville. The same barracks, remember, where a Belgian general once wrote, "Before independence equals after independence" on a blackboard. The place where the betrayal began is now the place where they cage the man who tried to undo it. Picture the cell, peeling colonial yellow paint, rusted iron bars, the stagnant heat, the stale air thick with sweat and fear. And Patrice Lumumba inside it, his crisp white shirt now gray with dirt and dried blood, the orator reduced to a man on a concrete floor. But even here, even now, he does not beg. He writes. He holds on to the one thing they cannot cut out of him, the belief that his country's destiny is bigger than his own body. But a prison is only as strong as the men guarding the door. And at Camp Hardy, the men guarding the door are Congolese soldiers. And these soldiers can still hear the name Patrice Lumumba, the way the whole country hears it. In the middle of January, the guards begin to waver. There is a mutiny brewing inside the camp. The soldiers who are supposed to hold Lumumba are talking about the man on the other side of the bars, and some of them are remembering that he is their prime minister, and the whispers turn toward the unthinkable. What if they simply let him out? What if they join him? And that whisper is what terrifies the men in Brussels and Leopoldville more than anything Lumumba has ever done. Because a caged Lumumba is contained. But a Lumumba the army might free is a Lumumba who could walk out of that cell and back into power, carried on the shoulders of the very soldiers sent to hold him. The mutiny does not make them decide to hold him tighter. It makes them decide they can no longer hold him at all. If the men guarding him might set him loose, then the only way to be certain is to move him somewhere no loyal soldier can reach him. To hand him to men who do not admire him, who do not fear him, who hate him. To send him to the one place on earth engineered to be his grave. They decide to fly him to Katanga. Before we board that plane, go back 2 months to a single telegram, because this is the document that proves it was never the Congolese acting alone. October 6, 1960. A Belgian minister named Count Harold d'Aspremont Linden puts his authority behind a cable, and the words are not coded, not softened, not deniable. The definitive elimination of Patrice Lumumba, it reads, is the main aim to pursue. Definitive elimination, read by a minister of a European government about the elected leader of a sovereign nation. For decades, Belgium would insist it had no hand in the killing, that this was an African affair, a tribal score settled by Congolese. This cable, buried until a parliamentary inquiry dug it out 40 years later, is the fingerprint on the trigger. The order came from Brussels. It was always going to come from Brussels. So when the men at Camp Hardy panic in January, when the mutinous guards start whispering about freeing their prime minister, the machine already knows what it wants. It does not want him held. It wants him gone, and it has the perfect destination. Katanga. Understand what Katanga means for Lumumba specifically. This is the breakaway province. This is Moïse Tshombe, the secessionist he called a traitor, backed by the Belgian mining money and the white officers Lumumba spent his whole career fighting. Sending Lumumba to Katanga is not a transfer between prisons. It is delivering a man to the doorstep of everyone on earth who most wants him dead. Everyone involved knows it. That is the point of choosing it. They forged the paperwork. They arranged the aircraft, an Air Congo DC-4. And on January 17, 1961, they bring 3 men to the tarmac, Patrice Lumumba and 2 of his loyalists, Maurice Mpolo and Joseph Okito, who have refused to abandon him. They put them on the plane, and the plane lifts off toward the one province built to be their abattoir. Now, the platform rule holds here, and so does human dignity. So understand what happened on that flight through its aftermath, not its detail. The soldiers and guards on board turned on the 3 bound prisoners in the cabin. What was done was severe enough, sustained enough, that it reached the one place violence in the back is never supposed to reach. The cockpit. The pilot, up front, flying the aircraft, sent word back that it had to stop, not out of mercy, out of physics. The beating was so violent, the movement in the cabin so extreme, that it was affecting the balance of the plane. The pilot of a DC-4 in flight was warning that the assault on the prisoners was destabilizing the aircraft itself. Hold that image, because you never have to see a single blow to understand it. A man at the controls, thousands of feet over the Congo, feeling his aircraft shift and yaw beneath him, and realizing the cause is what the men behind him are doing to a bound prisoner. The violence was so total, it moved the plane. That is all you need to know, and it is more than enough. By the time the DC-4 touches down in Katanga, the 3 men who walk off it are barely recognizable as the men who boarded, and there is no rescue waiting. There is Tshombe's police. There are Belgian officers. There is the machinery of the secessionist state, assembled and ready, because they knew exactly what flight was coming and exactly what it carried. They take the 3 prisoners to a house first, and through the evening, Katangan and Belgian figures come and go, and the abuse continues, and the decision hardens into its final shape. This is not a place they intend to imprison Lumumba. There is no long-term cell being prepared. There is only a question of when, and where, and who will give the last word. Now name the men who will manage the end, because this is where the myth of the clean intelligence operation must fall completely. The firing squad that will carry out the execution is not some Congolese mob acting on its own rage. It will be commanded by Belgian officers, a police commissioner named Frans Verscheure, a military officer named Julien. These are not shadows. These are named Belgian nationals in command on the ground, running the killing of another country's prime minister as an operation. And that is the fact Belgium spent decades hiding. For years, the official story blamed Katangan rebels, wild men in the bush, tribal violence, anything to keep white European hands out of the frame. The truth, confirmed by Belgium's own parliamentary inquiry, is that European officers commanded the squad. This was a state-directed killing, ordered from Brussels, routed by design, and executed under Belgian command. Center the three men now in the Katanga night because it is easy to lose them under the weight of the geopolitics. Three human beings. Lumumba, 35, who a year ago was celebrating his country's freedom in a tailored suit. Maurice Mpolo, Joseph Okito, bound, broken by the flight. Hundreds of miles from home, delivered into the hands of the men they knew would kill them, in a province that hated them, with no camera now, no press, no world watching. At Ndjili, at least the whole planet saw. Here in Katanga, the men who arranged this made sure there would be no lens at all. That was deliberate too. What they were about to do, they did in the dark on purpose. And somewhere in the West, the men who set this in motion slept soundly. Larry Devlin, who tracked the escape and helped grease the machinery of the transfer, knew a plane had gone to Katanga. Davignon's paperwork had done its quiet work months before. The telegram from Brussels had named the aim. Every hand in the chain had touched the thing and then let go, so that no single hand would have to feel the weight of it. But the weight was real. Three men in the Katangan brush, and a decision already made in an office they would never see. As night fell on January 17, they were driven out of the town, away from the last houses, out toward a clearing in the savannah where a large tree stood. Jeep headlights would light the ground. A squad was assembling. A Belgian officer had a pen and a scrap of paper in his pocket. And in that clearing, in the sweep of the headlights, the story of Patrice Lumumba was about to be logged coldly in 4 words by the hand of the man commanding his death. A clearing in the savannah near Shiltembo. Night, the 17th of January, 1961. Jeep headlights sweep across the grass and catch the trunk of a large tree. The beams are harsh, yellow, throwing long shadows of moving men across the ground. Somewhere, out beyond the light, the darkness of the Katangan bush presses in, and in the center of the light, 3 bound men are pulled from the vehicles. Lumumba, Maurice Mpolo, Joseph Okito. Understand where they are because the geography is the cruelty. This is not a courtroom. There is no trial, no charge, no judge, no sentence read aloud. There is a clearing, a tree, headlights, and a squad of armed men waiting in the dark. A man who won a national election, who shook hands with a king, is standing in the grass of a breakaway province with his hands bound, and the last official act of his life will be no act at all. No paper, no process, just the light and the tree. Name who is running it one more time so it is never lost. The squad is under the command of Belgian officers. Julien Gat, Frans Verscheure, a police commissioner. This is not a mob in the bush. This is an operation managed by European hands, ordered from Brussels, carried out in a place chosen precisely because no camera would ever find it. The platform rule holds, and dignity holds, so I will not walk you through the moment itself. You do not need it. 3 men were stood against a tree in the sweep of the headlights, and a squad commanded by Belgian officers did what it had been assembled to do. And then it was quiet. Now hold on the one detail that says everything about how these men saw the life they had just ended. Frans Verscheure, the Belgian police commissioner, took out a pen, and on a scrap of paper, in the shorthand of a man filling out a form, he wrote the time and the fact. 4 words, half of them Flemish. 9:43, L, dead. 9:43, L, dead. That is the entire epitaph a Belgian officer gave to Patrice Lumumba. Not a paragraph, not a name in full. An initial and a time, logged like a shift change, like a delivery signed for, like the closing of a ledger. The most feared man in Africa, the voice that stole a microphone from a king, reduced in a killer's diary to a letter and a number. That scrap of paper survived. It stayed hidden for 40 years, until Belgium's own parliamentary inquiry finally forced it into the light, and it became the only exact timestamp of the murder. The men who ordered this killing wanted no record at all, and in the end, the record that damns them was written by one of their own in his own hand, because to him, it was not a crime worth hiding. It was paperwork. Sit with what that tells you about the mind of the perpetrator. He was not trembling. He was not haunted, not that night. He was recording an outcome. The banality of it, the pen, the scrap, the shorthand, is its own kind of horror, because it means the men doing this had so thoroughly convinced themselves that Lumumba was not fully a man, that ending him warranted only 4 words. Now center the ones who are not in that diary at all. Maurice Impolo, Joseph Okito, 2 men who had a choice, back at the river, back at the airport, back at every checkpoint. They could have peeled away. They could have saved themselves. They stayed with Lumumba to the last, into the plane, into the beating, into the clearing, into the headlights. History remembers the one name, but 3 men died against that tree, and the other 2 chose to be there. Loyalty like that deserves to be said out loud. Maurice Impolo, Joseph Okito. Say them. And far away, a young woman does not yet know she is a widow. Pauline is still out there, 23 years old, her infant son on her hip, somewhere in the wreckage of the country that swallowed her husband. On the night of the 17th, while a Belgian officer writes 4 words on a scrap of paper, she does not know. No one tells her. No one intends to tell her. The men who did this plan to let the silence do their work, to let the world slowly forget there had ever been a man to account for. Here is the belief that dies in this chapter. We are raised on a certain picture of the assassination. Clean, professional, a silenced pistol, a precise operation, intelligence men who kill without mess and vanish without trace. That is the movie version, and the men who make the movies want you to believe it, because it makes the killing seem almost surgical, almost justified. The truth is, a clearing in the dirt, Jeep headlights, colonial police officers, a tree splintered by bullets, 3 broken men who had been beaten across half a country, and a killer's diary entry that reads like a punch clock. There was nothing surgical about it. It was a brutal, squalid killing in the grass, dressed up afterward in decades of official lies. But even now, the men in that clearing are not finished. Because as they stand over what they have done, a new fear begins to work on them, and it is a specifically colonial fear. A grave. If they bury these 3 men here, in this ground, then the ground has a name, and a name becomes a place, and a place becomes a shrine, a site where a whole country, a whole continent, could come to mourn and to remember and to rage. They have killed the man. They have not killed what he means. And a burial spot, however hidden, is a seed. They realize, standing in the headlights over a fresh and hasty grave, that killing Lumumba was not enough. They have to make sure there is nothing left to bury at all. No body, no bones, no spot on the earth a mourner could ever kneel. To do that, they will need tools no firing squad carries. They will need a saw. They will need barrels. They will need acid. And they will know exactly which company to ask. January 21st, 1961, 4 days after the clearing, the savannah near the border of northern Rhodesia. Meet the man they sent to finish what the firing squad started, Gerard Soweto, Belgian, a police commissioner in Katanga, 40 years old, a heavy-set man who came to the Congo in 1946 and stayed to serve the white minority state that broke away. Picture him in the humid dark, sweating through a rumpled khaki uniform, and understand that his assignment is not to kill anyone. The killing is done. His assignment is erasure, because the men in charge have made their decision. The hasty grave near Shiltembo is too dangerous. A grave is a location, and a location becomes a shrine. So they order Soweto to dig the 3 men back up and make sure that no grave, no body, and no bone ever exists for anyone to find. Now, here is the detail that closes the loop I opened 7 chapters ago. Remember the Union Minière du Haut Katanga. the Belgian mining giant that bankrolled Katanga's secession to keep its copper and uranium out of a nationalist's hands. The company at the financial center of this entire story. The acid that Soete and his brother used to dissolve the bodies is requisitioned from the Union Minière. Sit with the full shape of that. The corporation did not merely fund the breakaway that starved the country. It did not merely profit from the wealth Lumumba wanted, returned to his people. When the time came to erase the man himself, the industrial chemicals came out of the company's own mining stores. The Union Minière stole the land's riches for half a century and then supplied the acid to dissolve the one man who tried to take those riches back. The barrels arrive in heavy glass carboys cased in wooden slats, stamped with the company's logo. The same logo that sat on the mines, on the ledgers, on the wealth shipped out to Belgium, now sits on the barrels brought out into the bush for this. The platform rule holds, and the dignity of these men holds, so I will not describe what those 2 days demanded of Soete's hands. You do not need it. Understand it through the air instead. The stench. Gasoline and concentrated acid, bubbling and smoking in the humid night. A throat-burning chemical reek so total it overpowered everything else in that clearing. 2 men worked in that smell for 2 full days, 48 hours. That figure alone tells you the scale of what they set out to erase, because it takes a long, deliberate, monstrous kind of labor to make 3 human beings disappear entirely from the earth. And they nearly succeeded. No grave, no remains, no place on the map. The men who ordered this got exactly what they wanted, a leader who could not be mourned at a graveside, because there was no graveside, because there was nothing left to lay in the ground. Except that Gerard Soete could not resist taking something for himself. Before the last of it was gone, he reached in and pried loose a tooth from the skull, a molar capped in gold. He wiped it clean and he put it in his pocket, a souvenir, a trophy, a piece of the Prime Minister of the Congo, kept by the man assigned to make sure no piece of him survived. And he kept it for 40 years. This is the man from our very first scene, the sweating officer with the hacksaw and the tooth in his fist. Now you know what he was doing, and now you know what he took. But the true obscenity is not what he did in 1961. It is what he did in 1999. Because Gerard Soete did not spend his old age hiding. He went home to Belgium, he became a teacher, he wrote books, he lived a comfortable, respectable life for 4 decades, a free man in a quiet country, while the world was told that Lumumba's fate was a mystery, that the body was simply lost, that no one quite knew what had happened out there in the bush. And then, an old man in a comfortable chair, he sat down in front of a German television camera in 1999, and he confessed, calmly, almost cheerfully. He described the saw and the acid as if recounting a day's yard work. And then he reached into a small box, and he held up the teeth to the lens, one of them gold-capped, and he smiled. Look at what that smile means. It means he never once feared a courtroom. It means that for 40 years, the physical evidence of one of the century's most notorious political murders sat in a private Belgian home, in a box, a war crime you could hold in your palm, and no one came for it. It means the state that ordered the killing protected the man who erased the body so completely that he could brandish the proof on television and pay no price at all. Here is the belief that dies in this chapter. We tell ourselves the truth was lost, that the horror of Lumumba's end was swallowed by the jungle and the years, unknowable, tragic, gone. That is a comfortable lie. The truth was never lost. The truth was in Gerard Soete's pocket. The perpetrators lived free for decades, holding the evidence, willing to show it off because they understood something we would rather not, that no one with power ever intended to hold them to account. The daughter would later produce that gold tooth again on television in 2016, keeping the obscenity alive into a new century. The finger bones, the rest of the teeth, Soete once claimed he threw into the North Sea. which means pieces of a murdered head of state may still sit, to this day, in the dark of private European hands. We do not know. We may never know. The conspirators believed they had won. 3 bodies gone. No grave, no shrine, no martyr. A leader dissolved into the earth and a tooth kept as a joke. They had erased the man so thoroughly they could laugh about it on camera. But they had made one miscalculation. They had accounted for the Prime Minister, the Loyalists, the army, the parliament, the body itself. They had forgotten about his wife. And a 23-year-old widow, with her infant son on her hip, was about to walk into the streets of Leopoldville and make the entire world look at what they had tried to make disappear. For 3 weeks, the world was told a lie. Lumumba had escaped, the story went. He was on the run. He was alive somewhere or killed by villagers. The details vague, the truth buried in a clearing and dissolved in a barrel. The men who ordered his death were counting on time, on silence, on the slow forgetting. They had not counted on a 23-year-old widow. February 14, 1961. The news of Patrice's death finally breaks into the open. And in Leopoldville, Pauline Opongo Lumumba makes a decision that no diplomat, no general, no intelligence officer had planned for. She walks into the street, and she strips to the waist. Understand what this is, because it is not what a Western eye first sees. This is not exposure. This is the oldest and most powerful expression of grief a Congolese woman can make. A mourning older than the colony, older than the borders drawn by strangers. To bear herself in public is to say, I have been stripped of everything. My husband is gone. My dignity has been taken, and I will make you look at what your world has done to me. She marks her skin with ash. She lifts her infant son Roland onto her hip, and she begins to walk. Behind her, a procession gathers. 100 followers fall in behind the widow and the child. And she does not march aimlessly. She marches with a destination, straight through the streets of Leopoldville toward one building, the headquarters of the United Nations. The same UN whose peacekeepers guarded her husband's house and then stood down. The same UN whose soldiers watched at the river and did not fire. She walks her grief directly to the door of the institution that was invited to protect him and chose to watch him fall. And she demands the one thing they cannot give her because it no longer exists. She demands her husband's body. Center her fully here because she is the truth this whole story has been building toward. Married at 14 to a man the world would spend decades fighting over. She did not choose the microphone or the Cold War. Her screams on the riverbank were the sound that pulled him back to his death, and she will carry that for the rest of her life. And now, denied even a body to bury, denied a grave to kneel at, she refuses the one thing they most wanted from her. Silence. She turns her private grief into a public accusation, and she aims it at the world. And the world, which had watched Ndjili without lifting a finger, could not look away from this. The image of Pauline traveled. Her grief detonated across the planet. In the weeks around the announcement, protests erupted in cities that had never heard of the Sankuru River. In London, in Belgrade, in Cairo, in New York, crowds poured into the streets. At the United Nations itself, demonstrators broke past security in a fury. From Harlem to Moscow, Lumumba's name became a rallying cry, and the murder that was supposed to vanish quietly into the Katanga night became a global reckoning. Here is the belief that dies in this chapter. The men who killed him thought this was a local matter, an African tragedy, contained, forgettable, a colonial cleanup that would fade in a season. They were catastrophically wrong. Lumumba's death became a flashpoint that exposed the rot at the heart of the Cold War, that laid bare exactly how the powerful dispose of the leaders they cannot control. They tried to make him disappear. Instead, they made him immortal. And it was not a general or a president who forced that reckoning. It was a young widow with ash on her skin and a baby on her hip, walking down a street, refusing to let the world pretend it had not happened. Pauline would outlive nearly everyone in this story. She fled to a UN camp. She found asylum in Egypt under Nasser. She outlived her husband's killers, outlived the strongman who overthrew him, and did not die until 2014, more than half a century after that march. For 53 years, she carried the memory of a man the West tried to erase, and she never once let the demand go quiet. Give us his body. Answer for what you did. The global outcry was real, and it shook governments. But watch what happened to the men who engineered the murder, even as the streets burned with his name. Nothing. The architects did not stand in any dock. They did not lose their careers. As the protests raged and faded, the men who drafted the papers and sent the cables and funded the kernel simply straightened their suits and walked back into the corridors of power, into corporate boardrooms and government ministries, into long, comfortable, unpunished lives. The world had finally seen the crime. It had not yet begun to answer for it. And the answer, when it came, would arrive 65 years too late, in a courtroom that a dead man would never have to enter. June 20, 2022. 61 years after a Belgian officer pried a gold tooth from a skull, a Belgian prosecutor carried that same tooth into the Egmont Palace and handed it back. Picture the object now. A single molar capped in gold resting on pristine blue velvet inside a small case. The same tooth that sat for 40 years in Gerard Soetti's pocket, that he brandished on television with a smile, now returned to the Congo in a diplomatic box, escorted like a head of state. It was all they had to give back. Not a body, not bones. One tooth, the only surviving fragment of a man they dissolved into nothing. His family finally laid it to rest in a mausoleum in Kinshasa, and a nation buried a tooth because that is all the killers left them to bury. And the men who did this, hear how their stories end. Larry Devlin retired from the CIA and wrote his memoirs. Daphne Park was made a baroness, became head of an Oxford college, and confessed over a cup of tea only when she was old and safe. Gerard Soete died in his own bed in 2000. And Etienne Davignon, the young count who drafted the paperwork, became one of the most powerful men in Europe, an EU commissioner, a corporate titan. For 65 years, not one of them stood trial. Then, in March 2026, a Brussels court finally ordered the last surviving architect, the 93-year-old Davignon, to answer for war crimes. The first real reckoning in 6 decades, and on May 18, 2026, before he ever entered a courtroom, Etienne Davignon died. Peacefully. In his bed. The delay was not an accident. The delay was the strategy, and it worked. The colonial state ran out the clock, and the last hope of criminal justice died with the last old man who could have faced it. Now feel why this is not history. The Congo that Lumumba died trying to free today produces more than 70% of the world's cobalt. The metal in the phone in your hand. The battery in the electric car we call clean. The green future runs on Congolese earth, dug in many cases by Congolese hands, including children's hands, for almost nothing, while the wealth flows outward exactly as it did under Leopold, exactly as the Union Minière intended, exactly as the men who dissolved Lumumba made certain it would. He died so that wealth would stay in his country. It never did. The plunder he named in front of a king is charging your devices right now. So you have to answer the question they spent 65 years hoping you would never ask. Was Patrice Lumumba a Soviet threat the West was forced to eliminate to win the Cold War? Or was he a democratically elected patriot, murdered to keep a nation's wealth flowing into other men's hands? Was every word about communism just the cover story? Choose one, because the men in the clearing already did. Reconstructing what they buried takes thousands of hours. The records they hid, the names they erased, the truth they dissolved in a barrel and hoped the world would forget. If you believe Patrice Lumumba, Maurice Mpolo, and Joseph Okito deserve to be remembered, then stand with the people who refuse to let them disappear. Subscribe to Black Archive.